Thank you, Jen, for joining us. So I was lucky to meet Jen on the National Academy's report. I know she has a slide on that at the end. So we've worked together for a few years, and she is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Programs at Afterschool Alliance, where she's been at since 2002. And she oversees many things you guys may have heard of or used, like the America After 3 p.m. survey. I know I use that all the time. She works with the 50 State Network, which is funded by the Mott Foundation. And prior to that, she did work as a project officer for 21st Century Community Learning Program. So she is a wealth of information and just an amazing person. So I'm very excited that she's here. So thank you, Jen.
Course, yeah. I will say Sandy and I have like a mutual fan club. We both admire each other's work and yeah, are grateful for each other's partnership. And Deb Vandell too, known her for many years and really respect her work. But I'm excited to join you all. Yes, also Deb Vandell, who I've had the pleasure of working with for a number of years. I want to keep our conversation really conversational. I do have some slides I'm going to share here, mostly just to organize myself. So that I don't stray all over the place because there's a lot of things we could talk about today. But I want to kind of stick to what Mara and Sandy have talked with me about sharing with you all. So let's see if I can start this. All right. Does that look okay, folks? Thumbs up. There's no cover screen or anything. It's just like dive right into the content. So not a like about us or what we do or any of that. But the Afterschool Alliance is a national advocacy and public awareness organization devoted to ensuring that all young people have access to quality after school and summer programs. And we work a lot on federal policy, but we also support state level policy and even folks at the local level to help advance the policy work and the practice work that they're doing. And we, of course, this year have been very focused on some of the actions that everyone is watching that are impacting after school providers and after school kind of technical assistance organizations and after school researchers. So some of you probably have felt some of this impact in some way already, or at least are tuning in and hearing about what's happening. We're deeply concerned, right? Because the idea of we already have a significant opportunity gap in terms of who has access to after school and summer opportunities and who does not. And some of the research that I've been part of has contributed to sort of documenting that opportunity gap. So we know that that issue is there, and we know that kids do better when they have access to high quality programs, right, on a wide variety of outcomes. So I'm not here to kind of make that case. You all are on board with that already. But we also, as Sandy kind of alluded to, like we have a legacy here of like years and years of working to build the after school infrastructure. I personally have been in the after school field for like more than 25 years at this point. I was at the US Department of Education as a program officer for 21st Century, like right from the very beginning when that program first got started under the Clinton administration. So I'm personally like deeply committed to this, right, and helping ensure that all of the work that we've done over these 20 plus years is not just completely wiped out and we're like forced to start from scratch in a whole new way. Um, so the kinds of threats that we're seeing right now, like what are the mechanisms that might impact the availability of programs and funding for these other kinds of supports that are critical for programs too? We're seeing things like the potential for consolidation of funding streams like 21st Century into larger block grants that would be administered by state education agencies and have a very wide set of allowable uses for local school districts would also significantly limit who would be able to access funds. So to the point that Mara was making at the beginning about Adrian's work with faith-based organizations, right? If everything gets block granted, school districts are the only eligible entities in those instances. And then that leaves out all of our community partners, including our faith-based partners, who could only access funds if school districts were willing to pass those funds through. But if school districts are also facing consolidation, of other funds into these block grants, they're really going to have to make tough decisions. And we know history tells us that when forced to make those kinds of tough decisions, school districts will support their staff, right? And their core school building costs. And I'm not saying that's wrong. That's just the reality of like when you're pushed into that position, right? You have to decide which things are most central to your mission as a school district. And we know that after school often gets left out of that equation. So that whole consolidation is a significant concern. There's also, of course, the possibility of elimination of funds and activities like what we've seen under DOGE and the government efficiency efforts, where they're just like stopping activities without any real kind of precedent for that. So we're watching 21st Century Community Learning Centers funded out of the U.S. Department of Education. We're watching the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which so far seems to be escaping any um, real harm, but obviously keeping a close eye on that. AmeriCorps has been really hard hit, both in terms of like immediate reductions and also the current budget proposal from the Trump administration. NSF, the National Science Foundation, is in that same boat with a lot of contracts kind of immediately terminated, and then deep cuts in the president's budget proposal. And all of that, right, will impact other funds that grantees that typically get federal funds are usually able to leverage. Like if you don't have the federal funds, then you're not going to be able to go to these other funders and make the case for building off of those federal funds. So it's not limited to just these specific pots of funding. It has this trickle effect right over into other funding streams. We also know there are issues around like capacity building and supports, 21st century CCDBG, like all of these things have like a quality component to that funding that supports groups that do technical assistance, that helps provide those kind of quality supports that programs need. And if the programs themselves are either eliminated or consolidated, those kind of quality set asides and also oftentimes evaluation and research set asides, like 21st century has that as part of it, will also go away. And then overall in research, of course, we're seeing cuts happening there, as I've alluded to already. Under 21st century, Mathematica had a contract from the Institute for Education Sciences to evaluate a continuous, like a quality improvement system. And that contract was terminated earlier this year. It turns out that contract was 94% complete, right? So almost all of that work had been done. Sandy and I actually had conversations with the Mathematica folks as part of our committee work. And it just is stopped. It's like they're not going to be able to actually release those findings. Other people are having their NSF research projects cut. I did recently hear on a different webinar about contracts being resuscitated. And Sandy, I think you were on that same webinar actually, where they were talking about zombie contracts, which wasn't a term that I had heard, but it seemed like other folks were familiar with. So this notion of like some of these folks who were told to immediately terminate then are kind of coming back under some new authority, but I don't know how widespread that is right now. We do know that folks in the Department of Ed at the Institute for Education Sciences were really severely impacted by the cuts. And in the 21st Century Community Learning Center office, I also know that the program officers there were reduced by like at least half, like about half of the folks are gone. Not so much because of cuts, but because people took kind of the elective, like, I'm getting the heck out of here, like, early retirement options, fork in the road kind of choices that came up. This slide just gives you kind of a little background on 21st century. I'm not going to get into this with you all, but there's a lot of kids, a lot of families, a lot of staff members, right, who would be impacted by this. These are programs, as I referenced, that are really leveraging other dollars. And those other partners will be impacted as well. Talked about this already too, about how this will take a long time to recover from, that the ripple effects will extend far beyond 21st century because many of the supports that go to 21st century programs are relative for all after school programs. So the quality kind of supports the research and these kind of things like the national evaluation, right? Like we're going to lose out on opportunities to learn important information about how to improve programs going forward. We've been talking to a lot of programs. People are nervous, right? We're worried that people will act out of fear and not out of facts. So we're trying to make sure that people understand what's going on. Like as of right now, there is a president's proposal that eliminates 21st century. Does it do that sort of explicitly? No, but it does consolidate, sorry, something in my throat, a lot of the funding in the Department of Education, and the total amount is way lower than the original amount. And we actually played around with some AI to be like, okay, we see this is cut by $4.353 billion. Knowing these are the funding streams included in that, is there any scenario in which 21st century is not part of that? And essentially the answer is no. Like it has to be in that equation to total up to that amount of money. We're expecting the president's full budget proposal to come out here in a couple of weeks. And in theory, that should have more detail about exactly what these cuts are and should name programs like 21st century or like professional development dollars, Title II, if any of you work with that funding stream. Um, but right now, the skinny budget, as we call it, is just very vague. But we're assuming, and we feel pretty confident in that assumption that 21st century is up for elimination. This is all a proposal, right? We need to wait and see what Congress is going to do. The proposal came out on May 2nd. We had a group of about 50 advocates from 19 states on the Hill on the Monday right after it happened. And they met with 70 congressional offices, and we were pretty well received in our message of how critical this is. And we're doing a lot of other work to help prevent this from happening going forward. So that's like the FY26 budget. Right now, the FY25 budget is also kind of uncertain. Like we don't really know. We know the numbers that are in there, but there's also some new things that the administration is trying to do that could pull back money. We're waiting to see these state level allocations that state education agencies need to figure out like how much 21st century money do they even have to award in their next round of competitions. So 26 is very uncertain. 25 is a little bit uncertain, but we're really urging people to move forward as if they have the funding, right? Right now, you do have the funding. Right now, state education agencies are moving forward with competitions. We want programs to move forward as if they're going to have the funding that they need, because otherwise we're sort of proactively stopping programs from reaching kids and families. This just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the things that we're trying to do, more of a reassurance for the field, like we're here, we're paying attention, we're working on really reaching out to the key decision makers who are going to help shape this. We're working with a whole bunch of folks across the country on getting site visits with key members of Congress to happen. Adrian, I'd love to know some of the folks like at the local level that you're working with to see if it's possible. Faith-based programs could be a huge message point for some folks. We're trying to get 100% of our key members of Congress that we have targeted because of their roles on committees to meet with after-school leaders across the country, like to go on site visits or meet with them during these kinds of Hill offices. We're working on media coverage, trying to get folks, including researchers. So if anyone's interested in doing any of that work, Sandy and I have already talked about a little bit of that. Just raising as many voices as we can to help illustrate the importance of these programs. This is just so you all know, like these are the folks we're targeting. These are the key members of Congress. If you're working with programs in any of these places, we would love to hear from you to make sure we can feature their work and share information about their efforts with these offices. These are mostly not California members, as you're seeing. That doesn't mean California is not important. And I also know for many of you, your work extends beyond California, even though you're in California. So thought it was worth sharing here. And of course, again, all of the members need to know how important these programs are. It's just we have to pick top tiers that we're really focusing our most intensive efforts on. And then I wanted to end with some good news, which is that like there are a lot of people who are in support of after school and summer programs. This is a bipartisan issue that's enjoyed widespread support for a long time. 9 in 10 voters just this fall agree that programs are an absolute necessity. Voters want to see our newly elected officials at all levels provide more funding for after school. They're deeply opposed to eliminating funding like we see in the current proposal. And you can see here, we even could pull out voters who voted for Trump, right, are deeply opposed to eliminating funding for after school. And then lastly, I referenced earlier that the president's proposal came out on May 2nd. On May 1st, Sandy and I were on a webinar releasing this great new report from the National Academies, which actually makes a call for increased funding for after school programs and for intermediaries who help support the program quality work. It also talks about the workforce challenges and the need for policy solutions to help better support the workforce. And it calls for more research and more funding for research to do this work. So we have a great evidence base here that can be used to help in this moment that we're all in. We've got great voter support. We have great examples on the ground of folks doing the work. And it's just really mobilizing all of that to help ensure that the funding sticks around. But I'm going to stop sharing and would love to hear from you all. And there may have been some questions in the chat while I was sharing that I could not have seen that I'm happy to jump in and talk about now.
Thank you so much. This is really helpful. And I think first and foremost, speaking on behalf of everybody, thank you for all of the hard work that you have been doing over the past 25 years to get us to where we are in the field of after school, and then really just kind of doubling down on everything I know you're doing in the current context. So many thanks, and thank you for being here and sharing all of this. I put, I think mostly in the chat were mostly just comments from me. I'm taking some notes and also making some notes of some next steps, maybe connecting you and Adrian so you guys can connect around the faith-based stuff specifically. And I don't know, what specific questions, let's open it up, and people should feel free to chime in. Thanks for your email.
I think Adrian has a question.
Yes. One of my questions is the timing of the advocacy and the budget process. So, for example, if, making a push, when are the decisions likely to be made? I know it's kind of unpredictable in a sense, but, if we do, I know the federal fiscal year is 9/30, and we've gone sometimes for long periods without a budget. But what is your insight on the timing of advocacy and when final decisions might be likely to be made?
Yeah, it's a great question, Adrian. And yeah, you're right. Like when I first started doing this work, right, October 1 was the day when you needed a new budget for the for the next federal budget. And it's been a really long time now since we've been at that point. So these budget conversations are prolonged. They start kind of around the same time they always started here in the spring, but then they last way beyond the fall, often into the following spring. So it is, we've been referencing it's a marathon that we're involved in, not a sprint, right? We're going to need action at multiple points. So when we saw the budget proposal come out on that Friday, May 2nd, we launched a campaign that we're calling After School Works for America. And I'll just drop the link in the chat. That's really to illustrate the impact of the cut to 21st century and what that would mean for states. So how many young people and how many communities would lose their programs. And then we have links to kind of actions that folks can take and resources that they can use to help make the case to Congress for why we need to preserve funding for 21st century community learning centers in particular, because it's kind of this core infrastructure that lets people leverage these other funds. And since then, we've had about 35,000 messages go to members of Congress. So we had very good uptake on that. I think right now, if you haven't taken action yet, I would hold here for a few weeks and let's see that next budget proposal come out, which again, I'm thinking is going to be like early June. That should have the more detailed information. And at that point, we'll like launch kind of a second round of like getting people to do outreach to members. And, if you can't do this in your professional capacity, people have personal lives, you can do it in your personal capacity, right? Like I recognize everybody's got to keep their own um, firewalls between what may be funded and, all of that. So I want to recognize that, but also everyone can take action as citizens and individuals. And I would wait at this point to do it in that next round when we have a little bit more information. For folks who may have already taken action, amazing. And if you've been encouraging other folks to do it, that's great too. There is no wrong time to do it. I'm just anticipating like we could use a nice bump when the next kind of big thing happens. So thinking that it might be good to wait and do it then and, maybe kind of get your story together of what's the story you want to tell between now and then so that you're ready like the day that budget comes out. We don't know when it's going to come. We didn't know the May 2nd budget was going to come that day. We had been waiting for it for weeks and anticipating it, but it was just like, okay, we're hearing this morning it might happen, and there it was.
A follow-up question to that, if I can ask one more, is that our after-school experience in terms of workforce enrichment, quality, staff quality, is inextricably tied to the university. And so in 21st century, the university is you're the applicant. So how do you see the role of universities in the partnerships around 21st century as being impacted by this? Is there a way that universities can be involved in the advocacy, either through schools of education or specific discipline departments like mathematics and others that, have people out in the field work is so critical to exposure for potential teachers, part of the workforce. So how do you see universities being able to take part in this advocacy push?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you all, I think, probably in some ways are better positioned to answer that than I am. I know that universities in general are feeling a bit under attack, like all research institutions are feeling some of this. I would hope that, the people within your university that are more involved in kind of congressional relations are at least aware that this is a funding stream that's supporting some of the work that you're doing, so that they can kind of add it to the list of things that they might be talking about. And again, like as individuals, I think anybody who's working on issues related to this kind of as an individual can certainly reach out. One of the things that we've just started talking about doing that you all might be able to do with the programs that you work more directly with is just helping to make sure that parents in those programs even know that their program is 21st century funded. And that like we're working on kind of a fact sheet that's just a thing that could be left at like places where kids get picked up or where kids get dropped off, right? Places where parents have to sign their kids in and out. Like kind of a bulletin boardy sort of experience that's just like, did you know this program is supported with federal funds through the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program? And it doesn't really ask them to do anything. So it's not an advocacy ask at this point. It's a like awareness building so that if we get to the point where people start hearing about, oh, because this happened under the last Trump administration, they tried to eliminate funding for 21st century and it became a bit of a headline, partly because it got combined with Meals on Wheels in a lot of headlines, and people were really adamant about not getting rid of Meals on Wheels. And so we wrote a little bit on the coattails of Meals on Wheels in that instance. But people started hearing about it getting cut. But if you don't know that that program is how your own program is funded, then you're less engaged around it. So just some of that awareness building, even now, of like, this is what the program does, and this is a place that would lose funding if the funding was cut. And just at that, without an advocacy ask, just an awareness building for people who may not be comfortable with kind of that next step of, and you can take action by going to After School Works for America. Is that helpful, Adrian?
Right, absolutely, and especially the part about our congressional relations folks in the university as a whole, and maybe UCOP and, the deans. So, yes, absolutely helpful.
I had a related question. I mostly know, thank you, by the way. I mostly know of lots of university folks who have had NSF funding canceled, and there are a couple, and maybe they're just rumors, but a couple stories I've heard around, especially groups that are like have legal resources available to them that were able to like threaten to sue or sue and get some of their money back. Are there any like groups of lawyers that are standing up to sort of help folks in that way? Like, has there been any activism in that way that you've seen, that like smaller grants might be able to reach out for legal assistance to challenge some of this?
I don't know that I've seen groups of lawyers. The one group that I've heard talk sort of on behalf of kind of the research community the most is this group called Knowledge Alliance, which represents a bunch of the bigger kind of, like the AIRs, the APT associates, like those kinds of research institutions in the education space, that they've been doing a lot of kind of tracking of the cuts that are impacting research. And they have like an email communication that goes out, I think, pretty regularly to update folks on what they're seeing. They might have something there that like points folks to some resources. I had a website that was shared and then my computer shut down, and it was one of the many tabs I had open that I can't find anymore, but I'll see if I can dig it up too. And other people on, here may be better informed about that than me, actually, if you've been experiencing some of that yourselves and want to share with each other how you've been connecting.
I have a question. I know that this must really vary by region and by state, and I wonder if this might also be a question for Sandy, because I was so struck by the reports and the book that just came out about the ecosystem regional approach to after school. It's such a tight fit between after school systems and regional approaches. But I also wonder if this is a question for the Afterschool Alliance, because in the research project that I've been doing this year about our after-school systems, um, so many people have said we're never going to make a dent in our top-down situation. And a lot of us, we don't have federal funding. It's not coming from 21st Century or any of the federal sources. And we're in really bad shape in after school and also in the partnerships programs. And so people are saying we have to go straight to the community and we have to go straight to the coordinator positions and to the systems that have, in some ways, collapsed during COVID. We need to be more self-reliant. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that on a national level, and if there's sort of like while we're continuing to advocate and work at the federal and lobby level and keep the pressure on Congress, is there also sort of like a strategy in motion or in development for working at these regional levels and to strengthen the partnerships that are going to need to happen anyway?
I think there is some growing momentum around that, right? Like there's a group, I think we feature their work in the report somewhere, a group called Every Hour Counts, which is kind of a national organization that represents a lot of the local level intermediaries, and they just grew their membership I want to say they added like 15 more communities to, it's a group that's growing. The Wallace Foundation, which of course supported the National Academy's report, has a long history of investing in local level intermediaries and is kind of looking at the next phase of their work as well. The National League of Cities has been doing a lot of work around kind of the leadership of mayors and how mayors can actually and city councils, not just the mayoral level, can form kind of entities within their aspects of government to better support after school. Different states have been picking up on like the idea of just creating divisions within their state education agencies that are focused more on expanded learning opportunities. So California has been a pioneer in that, really, and in a lot of ways has been a pioneer in everything after school. But we're seeing that happening now in states like Michigan and Minnesota as well, where people are trying to really take some of the different funding streams that are coming into the state and better coordinate them, to help people at the local level navigate all of that stuff a little bit more easily, and then layer on like local level supports to help with that work too. But yes, I want to reinforce one point you said, which is yes, I think this kind of work, better coordination, alignment at the local level is critical, but also I don't ever see that making up the gap for the federal investment, right? Like we can't lose the federal investment, and the places like states like California that have already invested state level money, but we can also do better at the local level to better coordinate those things going forward.
Leslie's question was the same as mine. And I do work closely with our Region 5 expanded learning programs. And we're also reaching out to out of school programs and trying to support the network. And so I do agree that local coordination is essential. We're also seeing our coordinators, our site coordinators really overwhelmed in a lot of cases and want to know ways that we can support them while at the same time doing this advocacy work.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer to that. I hear, yes, I hear what you're saying, and I think that is a common experience that people are facing, right? It's like we know that folks at the local level are under a lot of pressure and strain, and the workforce is challenged by turnover and all of the things that are happening, which then feeds up, and you all then feel it too, right? Because the programs that you are working with are feeling those kinds of effects. And then ultimately it makes it all the way up to us, where, as I said, we're hearing like about the anxiety and the worries on the parts of programs and trying to figure out how to better support people in a whole multitude of ways. So
Can I
that
ask
wasn't really an answer, just a like empathetic response, I guess.
kind of building on those questions, another question that I have and that another one of our colleagues has asked also who couldn't join us today is thinking about, how to strengthen, right, all of this work. Wondering if you know of other networks that are similar to UC Links in that there are university and community partnerships and collaborations. Do you know of other networks or programs that are similar around the country that maybe we should know of or be in touch with or learn from?
I I'm trying to, I mean, I know of other individual folks at at research institutions, right? Like some of the other folks that Sandy and I worked with on the report, but I don't know what the community is that they might have surrounding them too.
Yeah, and I was just to add, in the report, I can look up the table in a second. there's a table, call out box or a table in there where we list some university degrees that are related to out of school and positive youth development, but I don't know if they necessarily like. I think there's one where Tom Akiva's at Pittsburgh, Clemson's another one. Some of them are undergrad, some of them are graduate, like a master's, for example. I don't know how much of them have the same model as us of them, of having the students work with after school programs. And Jen, just so you know, some of the people on the screen are like running their own program. Like they're providing the program, like, and the students are, the staff and they're running it. And then others of us are working with existing programs. So there's a couple different models that are represented on the screen. But I would think a lot of them might have collaborations with local programs. I don't know if they're running them like some of the people here are. So Mara, we could look at that table and see if, yeah, and contact people. I'm sure between all of us, we probably know a lot of the people at those universities to see
Hmm.
if we can make a bigger collective.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
think that's a great idea. I love that.
I saw Adrian's hand. I just wanted to check in also in case there are other questions. Angela, I know you joined late, or anybody else who hasn't asked a question already as we're getting close to time. All right, Adrian.
Okay, and I guess my question, because we're looking very strongly at making appeals within the White House Faith Initiatives Office and with Vice President Vance's office, because a large part of our faith-based partners are Catholic. And so, but is there any way that any advocacy efforts could be counter to what the Alliance is doing, or how can we stay in sync with the effort? Would you all like to be informed, or how? I mean, yeah. So that's my question.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great idea to try and work through the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives within the White House. Um, and kind of reinforcing some of the same asks. If folks decide that there's kind of an additional ask on top of like protect and preserve 21st century and these key supports, and then maybe if there turns out to be something else on top of that, would love to connect about that before it moves forward, just to make sure that couldn't be used as like oh, well, we did that instead of this, right? Like our priority, as I've suggested, right, is really around protecting and preserving the infrastructure that's been built over all these years for 21st century, like first and foremost. And then anything we can do on top of that, we're game for, basically. But we don't want to do things that will harm that effort. So yeah, Adrian, let's connect offline. I want to loop in our Vice President of Policy, Eric Peterson, who is brilliant and he'll review anything folks come up with and make recommendations, help shop things around. So yes, let's chat more about that.
I'll try to do kind of an executive summary piece with some of the research that we've done about how critical support in especially urban areas is for the faith-based partnerships. But thank you.
That makes sense. Yeah, love it.
Looks like you might have
Leslie.
30 seconds, Leslie.
Okay, well, so this goes back to sort of collaborative solutions and some of the things that I've been talking with folks about, which is not just staying with the universities, but with working with community colleges and teaching programs at the state level, at the Cal States, and really investing in workforce along with so again, supporting the infrastructure that's still there, and also um, using in California like the golden pathways and alignment initiatives to really grow the interinstitutional relationships and support the programs and the families at the same time. In some ways it looks like win-win-win. And I guess I just wanted to kind of throw out there also to this group that one of the concerns I have is, we don't want to fall into the Peter principle of sort of like trying to replace or seeming to replace the essential federal and state funding that we're losing. We don't want to seem like, we're all okay when it's not okay. We want to make sure that we're, communicating clearly that this is not sufficient. And so I'll just stop there and see if anybody else has any comments about that.
I think that's a really great point, Leslie. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that happen even on the part of philanthropy right now, right? Where there are a couple of foundations that are stepping in to do just what they're calling like bridge grants, right? Like recognizing maybe your NSF funding was lost and I can't replace your NSF funding because philanthropy will never make up for everything that government was doing, but I can maybe help get you through this little period of time while, as I think Meg had asked about, like while we wait to see how this works through courts or legal systems or whatever, right? Like that whole, so I think people who are stepping in to help fill gaps need to be really, really clear that they're doing it, but it's not going to be enough long term. It's just a band-aid for right now. It's not a permanent solution. It's a really important point to make. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jen, and to Sandy and to everybody who was here.
Thank you all. Nice meeting you virtually.